after the Washington Times reported that FBI agents could not verify any of the many outrageous and salacious details in the document, backed, by the way, and funded by Democrats and the Hillary Clinton campaign. In the meantime, the deputy FBI director at the center of the controversy over collusion between the Democrats and the Bureau is reportedly running out the clock. Really? He's hoping to hold on to his position until March, when he can retire from the FBI with full benefits paid for by you, the taxpayers. And the president's legal team claims the clock is ticking on the special counsel investigation of Trump-Russia ties. Trump attorney Jay Sekulow telling the Wall Street Journal he expects Robert Mueller's probe to be over soon, although he would not provide a specific date. Joining me now to talk about all of this, Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. Chris, good to see you. The president's tweet was an understatement. It's more than a pile of garbage, but, you know, we probably have kids watching, so I won't say what it really is.
Keep it clean.
But don't you think that the FBI of all agencies, of anybody, would want to verify at least some of it before they use it as a pretext to launch a federal criminal investigation into Trump-Russian collusion, because before the dossier, there wasn't a scintilla of evidence of it?
Failure to do so is criminal negligence on the part of those persons who then advance the manufactured dossier to use it, as leverage for FISA warrants. But, in your intro, you talked about some of the cast of characters involved. McCabe needs a waiver, according to my understanding, to get to the March retirement date. I don't think he's actually eligible to retire until a little after that. So his retirement and all the benefits that flow from it can all be administratively held. And I would recommend very strongly to the FBI director and the Attorney General that any sort of retirement or any benefits that might accrue to him all be held in suspension until this entire matter is cleared up. Just like, there's a similar instance where another very senior FBI agent, I think, read the handwriting on the wall and bailed out of this whole thing, and then found himself a very cushy job as a senior vice president for a major hotel chain in this country.
Right.
That individual, whose name I will withhold for the moment, but maybe later on we can talk about it.
Right.
That particular agent who's working for this hotel chain and driving a brand new Jaguar, he should be subpoenaed and called in. And frankly, the GS-13 journeyman level street agents who worked for McCabe and for Strzok, they should be called in to testify, because they're not going to lie and perjure themselves for their bosses.
Shouldn't all of these guys, if they're planning to vanish into retirement with full pension benefits paid for by taxpayers, shouldn't that all be held in abeyance until it's finally determined whether or not they should face criminal charges for things like filing a phony affidavit in support of a warrant to spy, or whether they were participating in obstruction of justice in clearing Hillary Clinton and targeting Donald Trump? I mean, those, as you and I have talked before, those are potential crimes.
Exactly, and these are measures that can be taken administratively. Look, if they run their investigation, whether it takes 6 months or 3 years, and they decide, you know what, we cleared you, you were just a unfortunate bystander, well then fine, they get all their pay and benefits, even if it's backdated. That's great. But this person, or these persons plural, should not collect a dime if they've been engaged in misconduct and attempting to overturn or thwart the election of the president.
There are two reports that I'm looking forward to. One is the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, who's looking into alleged wrongdoing by people like James Comey, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, maybe McCabe, guys like James Rubicki, James Baker, and Baker has since been reassigned. All of these guys are FBI players in the exoneration of Hillary Clinton, notwithstanding compelling evidence she violated the law. So when you hear that Devin Nunes is now talking with fellow members of the Intelligence Committee about issuing a report on FBI corruption, that'd be a long report in my judgment. How about yours?
It would be. The only problem is the Inspector General's Office of the Department of Justice is utterly gutless. And I'll name names. The Assistant Inspector General, a guy named Dan Beckhard, sat on criminal misconduct of federal agents and state and municipal law enforcement officers in El Paso, Texas. I know this firsthand. I'm not guessing at it. I've looked at this case for over 6 years. And so when there's people like Beckhart running around, he's the deputy.
Right.
You have to hope that Horowitz has enough guts to do the right thing.
It sounds like he may. So you've got Horowitz's report, which is supposed to come out in the next couple of months.
Maybe.
And there's pretty good evidence the Intelligence Committee will be coming out with a report as well, and maybe a separate report on FBI corruption. So, I mean, there is some hope for those who feel as though this entire thing was rigged, rigging it, fixing it so Hillary Clinton was absolved, and launching an investigation of Trump with no evidence.
Yeah, I would temper everyone's expectations. Look, many, not all, but many inspectors general are really the Department of cover-ups, all right? Their attempt is to constrain and minimize wrongdoing by the agency that they're inspecting. And so while I'm hopeful, I'm forever hopeful, but I'm also a realist. And I've seen these guys in action before. And if you expect some hard-hitting thing that can be turned around into an indictment, don't bet the farm on it.
I agree entirely. And that is the history of inspector generals. However, the fact that Horowitz obtained 10,000 of these text messages between Strzok and Lisa Page and revealed some of them, which are quite incriminating, anti-Trump messages, complimentary messages of Hillary Clinton, while these two are involved in both investigations. That does give rise to some measure of hope.
It does. It's just that, okay, we have those two, and they can be kind of strung up as piñatas for everyone to point at. But I think it goes deeper and further than even that.
All right. Chris Farrell, got to leave it at that. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Greg.
The president today spending his working vacation targeting not only the FBI and anti-Trump dossier, but also North Korea. The administration announcing new sanctions against a pair of officials that are key to the regime's ballistic missile program. Fox News correspondent Rich Edson is outside Mar-a-Lago in Florida with our report.
The Trump administration refuses to take a holiday from sanctioning North Koreans. The Treasury Department announced the United States is sanctioning two it describes as key leaders of North Korea's unlawful weapons programs. In a statement, quote, Treasury is targeting leaders of North Korea's ballistic missile programs as part of our maximum pressure campaign to isolate the DPRK and achieve a fully denuclearized Korean peninsula. The announcement follows Friday's United Nations Security Council resolution that imposed new sanctions on North Korea, targeting its money flow, a move North Korea equated to an act of war. International reports say the Russian government is offering to mediate between the U.S. and North Korea. The State Department failed to respond to requests to comment on the offer. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said North Korea must earn its way back to the negotiating table, starting with a halt on its missile and nuclear tests. Before leaving for his holiday in South Florida, the president promised persistent pressure on Kim Jong-un.
There is much more work to do. America and its allies will take all necessary steps to achieve a denuclearization and ensure that this regime cannot threaten the world.
While his administration focuses on North Korea, the president spent the day at Trump International, playing golf with Republican Senator David Perdue of Georgia, PGA Pro player Bryson DeChambeau, and former PGA Pro Dana Quigley. The administration describes this as a working vacation. On policy from the president this morning, a tweet. Quote, based on the fact that the very unfair and unpopular individual mandate has been terminated as part of our tax cut bill, which essentially repeals over time Obamacare, the Democrats and Republicans will eventually come together and develop a great new health care plan. Republicans already tried to replace Obamacare, thwarted by insufficient support in their own party. The White House says the president will discuss his 2018 legislative strategy the first week in January. with House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell at Camp David. The administration says it will also push an infrastructure package. Some Democrats say they are willing to work with Republicans.
We've got an aging infrastructure with potholes and highways that aren't working and bridges that are in trouble. We need to do something together to fix our infrastructure if we're going to stay competitive as a nation.
Immigration, budgeting, disaster relief, health care, all part of the 2018 congressional agenda, which is also a midterm election year. Greg?
Rich Hudson. Rich, thanks very much. We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us. President Trump delivering another campaign promise by cutting funding to the United Nations.
When was the last time you saw the United Nations make a settlement of some war? You don't see it. It's like a country club, folks. And we're spending a fortune.
We take up the president's America First policy with Ambassador John Bolton. And new calls for a purge at the FBI and Justice Department as President Trump works to drain the swamp. Those details and more next. Trump administration delivering on a promise to cut the funding to the United Nations, negotiating a $285 million budget cut. Now, the move follows a landslide vote condemning the decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Ambassador Nikki Haley in a statement saying, quote, "We will no longer let the generosity of the American people be taken advantage of or remain unchecked." The U.S. currently accounts for 22% of the United Nations budget. Joining me now to talk about it, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, now a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, great to see you. Excellent column that you penned in the Wall Street Journal today. Many presidents have sort of hinted that they are so disgusted with the United Nations that they have threatened under their breath, if nothing more than that, to cut some of the funding. This is a president who had the courage to actually do it. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's an important step, and I think there's every prospect there's going to be more of it. This particular budget cut was really negotiated, basically baked in the cake before the Jerusalem vote. But if there were ever a pivot point for an administration to say to Congress and the American public, this is what we're spending our money on, I can't think of a better one. You know, back in the day, in the 1980s, it was Congress that was cutting the budget to the UN and really cut a substantial amount under the leadership of Senator Jesse Helms. Right. Now I think President Trump has an opportunity to do something about it, and I hope he takes advantage of it. Well,
going back a few days, just before the vote and a great many speeches on the floor of the United Nations, the Turkish ambassador said, threatening to withhold money to member states would be extortion. You're trying to buy our vote. It's not even close to that, is it, Ambassador?
No, and I'd have to say, while certainly the budget levels at the UN are a serious problem for the United States, they're actually something else much more serious. They are symptoms of the larger problem at the UN where bureaucracies exist. I've called them self-licking ice cream cones. They have no apparent effect in the real world, but they cost a lot of money. And so I think what the United States needs to do is go through and systematically separate the UN sheep from the goats. And I'd even go further. I'd say the entire assessed system of contributions. You mentioned the U.S. pays 22%. It's kind of like an international tax. We pay 28% of the peacekeeping budget, right, which is actually bigger than the regular budget. Let's just contribute on a voluntary basis. We'll outrage some countries, but sure, let's just contribute to what we think is worthwhile and not contribute to what we think is not worthwhile.
Right. Well, one could argue the entire United Nations is not worthwhile, but we'll leave that for another day. Let's turn now to North Korea. A couple of topics there. The South is asking that the United States postpone military exercises, worried about some provocation with the North before the Olympics. There's also simultaneously some talk about negotiations, although the North is refusing to back off its nuclear program. What do you think of those two topics?
Well, I think it's understandable South Korea is worried about the effect on the Olympics, but honestly, there are bigger things at stake here, and I'm pretty convinced that we're going to come to a head on the North Korean nuclear program in the very near future, and I feel sorry about a potential impact on the Olympics, but as I say, there are bigger issues involved. And as far as negotiating with North Korea, this is just a waste of oxygen. They are not going to give up their ballistic missile and nuclear programs voluntarily, and we're not seeing pressure applied to them that will make that happen.
Last subject, ISIS. U.S. forces and allied forces have done a wonderful job getting rid of the caliphate in Syria, northern Iraq, but what about Afghanistan?
Well, press reports at least indicate that they've expanded their territory there, that their influence is growing. This is true in other basically anarchic regions of the world, in Libya, in Yemen. So although the physical caliphate in Syria and Iraq is close to being destroyed, the ISIS threat is far from over, including in Syria and Iraq, where every likelihood is they'll turn back to terrorism rather than more conventional warfare. So I think the analysis by the intelligence community some months ago that the threat we face internationally is equal to or greater than it was on 9/11 remains true.
Quick question, I'm almost out of time here. The Kremlin is criticizing the U.S. arming the army in Ukraine. That must mean we're doing the right thing.
Absolutely. Look, I think it was long overdue to provide this lethal assistance, not long overdue in the Trump administration, long overdue going back to Barack Obama, whose passivity in the face of Russian military aggression, I think, encouraged Putin to go even further. So I think this is a significant move for the Trump administration. You have to wonder where all that collusion with Russia is when we're arming Russia's enemies.
All right. Again, everybody can read the ambassador's column in the Wall Street Journal, an excellent one. Ambassador John Bolton, is always great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Greg.
Be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Can you think of any reason the corrupt and conflicted Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe should be given full retirement benefits from you, the American taxpayer? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. And a reminder, follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, like him on Facebook, follow him on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. On Wall Street, stocks ticking a bit lower today. The Dow off 8 points, the S&P down 3, the NASDAQ dropping 24 points. Volume on the big board, the lightest of the year at just under 2 billion shares. Apple shares falling more than 2.5% on reports of weaker than expected demand for the iPhone 10. And crude oil setting at the highest level since June of 2015, closing nearly $60 a barrel. And a reminder, listen to Lou's report 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network. Coming up next, the White House is demanding answers about bias at the FBI and Justice Department during the Clinton probe.
So the president is saying we need to know that our civil servants are doing the honorable thing, and it's important the American people know what happened in that investigation.
Ed Rollins taking that up and more coming up next. Stick around. I'm Greg Jarrett in for Lou Dobbs. He's on vacation. President Trump making historic moves to transform the courts during his first year in office. The president has nominated 66 judges thus far this year, nearly 3 times as many as President Obama did during the same period. But thanks to obstructionist Dems and weak Republican leadership so far, only about a third of President Trump's picks have actually been confirmed. New York's left-wing Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, meantime, is waging legal war against the president. Schneiderman has now challenged the Trump administration or congressional Republicans 100 times, including a lawsuit over air pollution today. These suits oppose the administration on everything from the travel ban to repeal of net neutrality. Well, joining me now is former Reagan political director and Fox Business contributor Ed Rollins. You know, that was to be expected, I would think. Legal challenges against the president. The first one was actually filed by Richard Painter and a couple of others within 2 days of the president taking office, claiming he violated the Constitution on emoluments. I wrote a column saying it's a total joke and it'll be dismissed, and sure enough, a few days ago it was dismissed. The president hadn't even unpacked his red ties, and they were suing him. So it's no surprise.
Well, I think one of the important things is you talk in terms of the number of judges that the president has moved forward and will continue to move forward. The courts play a very important part in this government, and as they were set up to do. And the key thing is to make sure you get your good people in there, and you make sure that people share a conservative philosophy and make sure that they are well-skilled and can stay a long period of time. Because as we see, the first major things that the president put up there's some judge somewhere basically tried to block it. So I think the key thing here is to find good conservative judges that have experience, will stay on the court for a period of time, and not just come in for 2 or 3 or 5 years and leave. So
I wrote a column about 3 weeks ago that said the only collusion appears to be within the FBI and the Department of Justice to clear Hillary Clinton and frame Donald Trump. Every day seems to bring new evidence of that.
I think that's a terrible disappointment for me. I've always had a lot of respect for the FBI. That I started in politics during the Nixon era when you still had some not necessarily best people in the FBI and other agencies. And I think over the last 20, 30 years, we've tried to clean that up and move them forward. Somehow it got very politicized in the last 8 years. And I think the Justice Department was the lead of that. And I think there's no question, I've never seen in all the years I've been around politics ever an attempt to tip the balance as they did. They were very pro-Hillary and very anti-Trump. And the idea that you weren't going to let the people make their choice, as they did with Trump, that you're going to have a checkmate system after that. And I think that's what we're going through today.
It never made sense when James Comey stood up in July of 2016 and laid out a fairly meticulous case of how Hillary Clinton had violated the law in the handling of her emails, and then said, but no reasonable prosecutor will bring this case. Now we're beginning to learn how that all occurred. People changed the wording in his statement to clear her when initially he was going to refer an indictment.
Well, the basic premise, as you know, having been a lawyer and having taught law, is that basically the Attorney General makes the decision. The FBI director does not make the decision whether you're going to prosecute. You put the evidence forward, and there was sufficient evidence put forward, or at least gathered, was not put forward, that she should have been indicted, or at least had more than her hand slapped. They clearly violated the law. They clearly obstructed things, and I think to a certain extent the FBI was fully in cahoots with that. And then the second step was to try and hinder Trump when he began his presidency.
And now we're learning that a year and a half after the FBI first got their hands on the dossier, they can't confirm any of it. And yet they used it in July of 2016, almost the same time they cleared Hillary Clinton, to launch the Trump-Russia investigation based on a phony document that they didn't try to confirm at the time before launching the criminal investigation.
It's one of the worst cases of law enforcement that I've ever seen. The idea that you go out and hire somebody to make a case through information that you know is false, and obviously when you go to the FISA court, as they did, my sense is you've misled the American public. You have done great disservice to the Justice Department at the FBI, and I think the story is going to finally get out. It may take a long time, but it's going to get out, and the public's going to be appalled.
And what's confounding is that McCabe, when he testified, apparently couldn't say when he learned that this dossier was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Wouldn't that be your first question? Where'd you get the dossier? Who paid for it? And if they had found out the answer to that question, they would have filed probably criminal charges against the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign, who paid for it, because that's a violation of the law during a political campaign. You can't pay a foreign national.
You can't pay a foreign national, and equally as important, you basically don't take political documents that are gathered to run a campaign against somebody and make it into a legal document. And I think to a certain extent that's what they did. And I think it's going to be one of the great black guys on the FBI. And Comey, who had a good reputation prior to leaving here, is now getting his total career tarnished.
Comey, McCabe,
absolutely,
James Baker, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, maybe some others, James Baker. I mean, the list goes on and on. It gets longer and longer day by day of people who appear to have acted improperly.
We knew the Justice Department was very politicized under Eric Holder and his successor. What we didn't know was the FBI had gotten very politicized, and it clearly is indicating that today.
And it's a shame, because the rank-and-file FBI are fine, honorable, hardworking, excellent people, absolutely, but it's the top management that became politicized under the Obama administration.
No, absolutely. So,
Ed Rollins. Ed, good to see you as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us.
President Trump confident that Republicans and Democrats will work together on his agenda in the new year.
Infrastructure is the easiest of all. People want it, Republicans and Democrats. We're going to have tremendous Democrat support on infrastructure, as you know.
Will Dems remain defiant as President Trump seeks another legislative victory? We'll take that up with Jason Chaffetz next. And this fearless snowmobiler stomping her name in the record books with this world-first stunt. We'll show you her amazing performance right here next. Stay with us.
President Trump today expressing confidence that congressional Republicans and Democrats will join forces to fix health care after falling short this year. The president tweeting, quote, based on the fact that the very unfair and unpopular individual mandate has been terminated as part of our tax cut bill, which essentially repeals Obamacare over time, the Democrats and Republicans will eventually come together and develop a great new health care plan. How about that for optimism? And joining me now, Jason Chaffetz, former Republican congressman from the state of Utah, now a Fox Business contributor. I give President Trump credit, Congressman, for his optimism, but I'm not sure there's much realism in that. What say you?
Yeah, I love President Trump's cheer in that one. Look, premiums are going up. People did not keep their same doctor like President Obama promised them. It was built on a bed of lies to start with. Prescription drug pricing is an issue. I do want to believe that there is some bipartisan way to do that if you parse the individual parts. But right now, I'm a little bit cynical because I believe everything that Donald Trump says and wants to do that is met by the Democrats with a stiff arm and say, no, no, no. I mean, they used to be in favor of reducing the corporate tax, but when Donald Trump says, hey, let's reduce the corporate tax, then suddenly they're opposed to it.
He could say the sky is blue on a sunny day and they would disagree. So
that's right.
I'm not optimistic, but one of the hurdles he's got to get over, and so does Congress, is funding the government. I mean, it's running out lickety-split, right?
Yeah. It's one thing to pass a tax bill, and hats off to the Republicans for, after having a faceplant essentially on repealing or replacing Obamacare, for getting their act together and passing tax reform. What's different come January 19th is when the government has